Good morning. State Senator Pamela Althoff bringing you an update on what's going on in Springfield, specifically with the educational funding reform legislation. This is the second installment, second update. I have with me Senator Dan McConkey from the 26th District. Senator McConkey has served on the task force since its inception. It's been meeting for a very, very long time. The last update was in the fall. I thought we'd take this opportunity to be updated again on what's happened since November now through March. So Senator McConkey, can you give me a little bit brief status update on where we are with this entire piece of legislation?
Sure. So the School Funding Reform Commission came to, by February 1st, they adopted essentially a framework on how we would proceed going forward. It was bipartisan. Both members of all four caucuses had 5 members from each caucus. They all signed on to it, as well as 5 members that was from the governor that signed on to it as well. Essentially, the outline was that there would be every school district in the state would be given essentially an adequacy number, and this would be based on 27 different elements from the evidence-based model, and it would be able to essentially indicate what does it cost to adequately educate a child in this district based on the population and the needs that they have and all of these various
poverty, some of those kinds of components as well. Mm-hmm.
And so those are now all a part of that. There's been some further discussions as now we're trying to move from the framework to bill form, and so obviously now we get into kind of the details that sometimes can get sticky at times in regards to whether it be on poverty, how much of a weight should that have, things like whether or not transportation needs to be inside or outside. Some of these were kind of agreed upon inside the framework, but now it's trying to really work through all of those details. And then there is that once you have that adequacy number, then the way it would work going forward is that all school districts for the first year would be held harmless. And so any money...
Explain hold harmless to me.
So any money that they received in 2015, which is the last year full budget that we had, they would get that money again. And then going forward after that, they're talking about having a per pupil hold harmless as far as any money that comes from the state. And then as the state puts in new money into the system, it will flow first to the poorest districts of the state in the greatest quantity, based on trying to help them get closer to adequacy faster. There's going to be some very interesting things probably looking at on property taxes and some of those factors. Every district will have what's called a local capacity target that identifies how much ought that district to be taxing based on this formula. So there will be districts that are above that, they're above adequacy, maybe they have a higher rate. Some of them may be below that. And so if you are a district that is below this local capacity target, then you would be you would never get to 100% of adequacy on state money alone. So this is an incentive for those districts who have chosen historically to not tax themselves and provide a quality education to essentially do so to be able to get to this very public number that'll be out there.
And what happens, because I think this is accountability, what happens to those districts that actually are taxing higher than that adequacy level?
So there will be a push, and what the final form of that will be, we're not quite sure yet, but there will be essentially an incentive to try to help those districts lower their rate. So some of the talk has been that there will be included as a part of a formula if you are way overtaxing. You're a district that we have some that are 2 times or 3 times even what their tax rate ought to be based on their local wealth. They will get state help earlier than some of those districts who have just chosen we're not going to invest in our kids. So while they'll probably still be in the same tier and will still be getting help from the state with any new money, there will be there's a desire to try to help those districts that have been helping themselves first.
And is there anything else outside of the actual funding mechanism in this piece of legislation that we should be aware of, either from the perspective as I'm a superintendent of a school and I need to know this, or as a parent of a child who's now in the public education system?
Well, we don't have a public bill yet, and so we'll have to see what's in there. But some of the things that have been discussed are relief from certain mandates. A 5-day-a-week PE, that would be lowered down. If you're in high school, it would be changed from 5-day-a-week to 6 semesters instead of that, so that it provides greater flexibility. Some options if you're in club sports or things like that,
Right.
you'd have the opportunity of being able to count that toward your PE requirement. Things like driver's ed, third-party contracting, some of these things have been looked at as far as kind of relief from mandates. None of that is set in stone yet. But certainly, we do have a hold harmless, so this, and then
For 1 year.
For 1 year on a district basis, it changes to a per pupil basis so that those districts that are declining in enrollment aren't essentially getting a disproportionate share of state money that's going forward when they have fewer kids. So that's why it'll be changing to a per pupil basis. But those districts that are increasing, then they will be getting more money, and it's beneficial to those districts so that the money is flowing where the kids actually are.
And so talk to me a little bit too about some of the block grant programs that are currently in place that we were concerned about because we thought that they too were dispersing money in a relatively unfair fashion. Or is any of that addressed in this legislation, this proposed legislation?
So some of the talk has been essentially eliminating some of these block grants and putting that money into the formula itself. That way, some of these districts who were receiving block grants but maybe had declining enrollment or really didn't quite qualify in the same way that they did originally would be still able to compete with those dollars, but they would open them up to every district in the state so that all the districts are on the same playing field instead of certain districts kind of being chosen as a beneficiary by the legislature for blocks of money. It would go through a formula where they get to essentially...
Taking the politics out of it, not leaving it in our hands to determine winners and losers, but there is a formula.
Right.
And I'm going to put you on the spot in conclusion, and I appreciate the fact that you have really brought us up to speed with what is being proposed and what is currently being drafted to be in that piece of legislation. But talk a little bit in conclusion about the differences between school choice, charter schools, homeschools, and the need for public education and how that kind of works from an overall concept. I really think that over the years as a former school teacher, there's been a loss of understanding about how we promote school option, school choice, but that our main responsibility as government is still providing an excellent education for the public. So do you mind to kind of opine on that?
So, one of the things that was discussed during the commission, everybody agreed with, that when you have charter schools that are district-created charter schools, that there should be equity, so that a child that is going into a regular public school or to a charter school is getting the same amount of resources. So there was definitely a look at alternative forms of education, that when those exist and are created at the district level, they should be resourced the same. In regards to others, we did not get into really school choice or homeschooling and stuff, except to say that essentially everything that we have at the moment would be carrying forward. We would not be adding additional burdens, if you will, on homeschooling or things like that we currently don't have. So there's no real discussion about adding regulations. What it would be is simply saying that the funds that we're putting forward, we recognize that there are some very poor districts out there, kids who just don't have the options that they need, and perhaps there aren't alternative even educational options in those areas. And so we know that as we're putting further funds into the state, we want to make sure that the poorest children in the state are being brought up to this adequacy level so that they all have the same ability of being able to really be ready for both college and career going forward.
Great. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to contact my district office or the office here in Springfield.